He held the throne of all the Russias for a mere 6 months. In that brief, chaotic window, he managed to accomplish the politically impossible. He turned the army, the court nobility, the powerful Orthodox Church, and even his own ambitious wife into a united front against him. On the 17th of July in 1762, the recently deposed ex-Tsar was discovered dead at a dusty, forgotten country estate named Ropsha. The official report, signed and sealed for the courts of Europe, claimed hemorrhoidal colic had carried him off, a convenient, almost laughable 18th century medical term for what amounted to a bad stomach ache. But the real story was far more grisly. Off the record, the telltale purple scarf of bruises blooming around his throat told a much louder, more violent story. This was no illness. This was murder. How did a German-born princess, an outsider herself, orchestrate what might be the slickest, most bloodless palace coup in the long and brutal history of the Russian Empire, and walk away without a single spot of blood on her hands? Peter III was never meant to rule anything, let alone the vast, sprawling Russian Empire. He was born Karl Peter Ulrich in Kiel, a city in the German Duchy of Holstein-Gottorp. His world was one of German discipline and military precision. He adored the sight of Prussian soldiers on parade, their rigid formations a source of comfort and order. Russian icons, with their mysterious and soulful gaze, held no such appeal. His life took an abrupt turn when his aunt, Elizabeth Petrovna, seized the Russian throne in a coup of her own in 1741. Childless and in need of an heir, she summoned her shy, awkward 15-year-old nephew to the glittering, intimidating capital of St. Petersburg. Once there, he was stripped of his name and his religion, rechristened Pyotr Fyodorovich, and forced into the Orthodox faith. Tutors were hired to hammer the complex Russian language and its bewildering verbs into his head. It was a losing battle. He came to despise everything about his new home, the language he could barely speak, the alien food like borscht, and the seemingly endless, oppressive snow of the Russian winter. Topping this long list of grievances, however, was his arranged bride, another German teenager brought to Russia for dynastic purposes, the clever and observant Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, who would soon be known to the world as Catherine. Their wedding night was a study in polite, Arctic frostiness. After the ceremony, separate bedrooms quickly became the established norm, a silent testament to the chasm between them. When Empress Elizabeth finally died in January of 1762, the world shifted on its axis. Overnight, the grown-up toy soldier enthusiast, the man who preferred drilling his personal guard to engaging in matters of state, became Peter III, Emperor of all the Russias. His first major act as sovereign was a decision so baffling, so profoundly insulting to the national spirit, that it sent shockwaves through the empire. He ordered an immediate end to the 7 Years' War and surrendered all of Russia's hard-won Prussian territories directly back to his personal hero, Frederick the Great. This was the very same Frederick the Great that Russia had spent years and countless lives bleeding to defeat on the battlefield. In the barracks of St. Petersburg, decorated guards officers, men who had earned their medals fighting the Prussians, tore them from their chests in open disgust. He wasn't finished. Next, Peter turned his sights on the Orthodox Church, threatening to seize its vast landholdings, the source of its immense wealth and power. He proposed dressing monks in plain civilian coats and, most offensively of all, forcing them to shave their sacred beards, a symbol of their piety. The clergy reacted with fury, with some monks leading open prayers for God to strike the new Tsar down with lightning. To this volatile mix, he added a final military insult, forcing the army to adopt the rigid, uncomfortable Prussian-style uniforms, complete with powdered pigtail wigs, and reintroducing the humiliating practice of parade ground floggings. By June, less than half a year into his reign, the boyars of the old nobility, the bishops of the church, and the generals of the army could agree on only one single thing. Peter had to go. While Peter was busy making enemies, his forgotten wife, Catherine, was making friends. She played the long game with a patience and cunning that her husband could never comprehend. She dedicated herself to becoming more Russian than the Russians. She diligently mastered the complex language her husband scorned, and her public conversion to the Orthodox faith was performed with a sincerity that won over the clergy. While Peter isolated himself with his German cronies, Catherine moved through the court with grace, flirting and building alliances with every influential officer in sight. None of these connections would prove more important than the one she forged with Grigory Orlov, a charismatic, broad-shouldered captain in the elite Guards regiment. Grigory and his 4 powerful brothers had enough sway to swing an entire regiment, and with it, the balance of power in the capital. As the summer of 1762 wore on, dark rumors began to circulate. Peter, it was said, planned to finally divorce Catherine, lock her away in a convent for the rest of her life, and elevate his longtime mistress to the position of empress. For Catherine, the writing on the wall was stark and clear. If she lost her marriage, she would lose her son, her position, and very possibly her own life. It was a matter of survival. The throne wasn't just an ambition, it was her only protection. The moment came on the 28th of June, 1762. Peter was away from the capital, distracted at his country palace, swatting flies, and bizarrely planning a small, pointless war against Denmark to settle a personal ducal dispute. This was the opening Catherine and her allies had been waiting for. In the pre-dawn darkness, a carriage brought her to the barracks of the Semenovsky Guards regiment. Dressed in a borrowed male officer's uniform, she presented herself to the awakening soldiers, holding aloft a proclamation. Her message was simple and powerful. "Russia's in ruins. Stand with me." The soldiers, already primed by the Orlovs and disgusted with Peter, roared their approval. The coup snowballed with breathtaking speed. Regiment after regiment poured into the streets, declaring their allegiance not to the emperor, but to his wife. By lunchtime, with barely a shot fired, St. Petersburg belonged to Catherine. Peter, hearing of the unfolding disaster, raced back to the capital, only to find the gates of his own palace barred against him. Confused, defeated, and utterly abandoned, he surrendered. On the 9th of July, he formally signed the papers of abdication. The total cost of this massive regime change was astonishingly low. 1 broken window and a single reported nosebleed. With less fuss than one would expect from changing horses for a carriage, Russia had swapped one emperor for another. But abdication did not mean freedom. A signed piece of paper could not erase the fact that Peter had been the crowned and anointed emperor of Russia. He was immediately taken under guard and driven to the crumbling, isolated estate of Ropsha, located about 20 miles outside the capital. There, he was kept under constant watch by a contingent of guards loyal to Catherine, commanded by none other than Alexei Orlov, Grigory's formidable brother. They fed him, they watched him play cards to pass the tedious hours, and they strictly forbade him from speaking to any passers-by. A living ex-Tsar, even one as unpopular as Peter, was a beacon for dissent. And while Peter languished in his provincial prison, the gossip mills of Europe's royal courts began to spin. Plots for his restoration were whispered about. His old hero, Frederick of Prussia, pointedly called Peter Russia's legitimate monarch. The government of Sweden hinted at a possible invasion to restore him to the throne. Anonymous pamphlets began to mysteriously appear in Moscow, demanding his immediate release. For Catherine, the situation was untenable. A living, breathing ex-Tsar was a political fuse. one she simply could not afford to leave lying around, waiting for a spark. Just 8 days after Peter signed his abdication, the court physician produced a tidy, convenient report. The former emperor, it stated, had succumbed to a severe attack of hemorrhoidal colic, which had been fatally aggravated by an apoplectic stroke. The cause of death was natural, unfortunate, and officially closed. Few people, however, were buying it. Even by the standards of 18th century medicine, the story was thin. Colic, however severe, doesn't leave bruises on a man's ribs. Strokes, however sudden, don't knot a silken sash tightly around the throat. Nevertheless, the machinery of the state ground into motion. Black drapes were hung over the Winter Palace. Courtiers put on the required black mourning clothes, their faces masks of public grief. A heavy, sealed coffin was prepared for the solemn Orthodox funeral rites. The official story was all that mattered, and the state would defend it at all costs. But behind the closed doors of the court, eyewitness notes and leaked accounts painted a very different, far more brutal picture. These unofficial versions of the story tell of what happened late on the night of July 16th. Alexei Orlov, Peter's chief jailer, slipped into the former emperor's room, accompanied by 4 of his guards. They found Peter drunk, belligerent, and shouting curses at his captors. From there, the accounts diverge on the specific details of the violence. One version says that Alexei Orlov, enraged by an insult, landed a single, powerful punch that sent Peter reeling. Another, more chilling account claims the guards overwhelmed him, pinning him down with a heavy mattress to muffle his screams, while they tightened a sash around his neck. A third version insists that Peter himself escalated the confrontation, grabbing a bottle to use as a weapon, only to slip on the floor and crack his skull in the fall, with the strangulation finishing the job. But whichever version you choose to believe, the horrifying finale is identical. A battered body is discovered. Servants hastily powder the corpse to hide the bruises, and a high-collared shirt and cravat are used to wrap the neck, concealing the marks of the ligature. The goal was to get the body buried before the sun could rise and outrun the inevitable rumors of foul play. In the aftermath, a conspicuous silence descended from the throne. Catherine's personal diary entries for this crucial period remain tellingly blank. The letters she was known to have exchanged with Grigory Orlov, her lover and co-conspirator, mysteriously vanished from the archives, never to be seen again. She never wrote a death warrant. She never signed a direct order. Historians today generally refer to her role in the affair as one of tacit approval. She didn't have to give the command. By placing her husband in the custody of the loyal but ruthless Orlov brothers, and by making it clear that a living Peter was a threat to her new reign, she had stacked the political game board so completely that checkmate was the only logical and safe move for her henchmen to make. It was a masterclass in the dark arts of 18th century politics. You keep your own gloves pristine and white. You ensure your henchmen are unbreakably loyal. And most importantly, you make sure your rivals are rendered definitively, permanently silent. By that grim scorecard, Catherine had aced the game. With Peter gone, Catherine moved swiftly to consolidate her power and cement her popularity. Within weeks, she began to publicly roll back all of her husband's most hated and foolish laws. The vast church estates, which Peter had threatened to seize, were declared holy and inviolable once more, earning her the undying loyalty of the clergy. The Russian military was allowed to discard the ridiculous Prussian uniforms and pigtail wigs, restoring their pride and earning her the devotion of the army. Court poets, eager to curry favor with the new ruler, began churning out endless odes praising the empress as the new mother of the fatherland. Across Europe, the crowned heads who had initially been appalled by the brazen coup and the suspicious death of a fellow monarch quickly change their tune. Faced with the reality of a stable and powerful new leader in Russia, they now queued up to sign lucrative trade deals and treaties. A dead husband, it turned out, made for excellent political compost, fertilizing the ground for a long and prosperous reign. Decades later, long after Catherine the Great's death, her estranged son, Paul I, finally ascended to the throne. Harboring a lifetime of resentment for the mother who had usurped his father and frozen him out of power, he enacted a strange and icy revenge. He ordered that his father's body be exhumed from its modest grave. Then, in a bizarre and macabre public ceremony, he gave Peter III the full state coronation he had never truly had in life. Finally, he had Peter buried, with full imperial honors, right beside Catherine herself in the royal cathedral, forcing them together in death as they never were in life. It was Paul's final, silent rebuke to the mother he could never forgive. And yet, even Paul, now the all-powerful emperor himself, never dared to publicly accuse Catherine of his father's murder. Some graves, it seems, are safer when left undisturbed, and some truths are too dangerous to the stability of the crown to ever be spoken aloud. Peter III lived for 34 restless and unhappy years, ruled for a mere 183 chaotic days, and ultimately died, choking on the brutal realities of a political game he never came close to mastering. In stark contrast, Catherine reigned for 34 triumphant years, pushing the borders of her empire west and south, and earning for herself the coveted historical title of the Great. Lying between those two vastly different fates is the story of a silk scarf, a drunken, desperate struggle in a dark room, and the muffled, terrible sound of a man discovering, far too late, that crowns can be slipped off far more easily than a life can be spared. If this twisted piece of palace true crime grabbed you, tap the like button, subscribe for more tales of thrones and betrayal, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Catherine gave a quiet, implicit nod for the murder, or did Alexei Orlov and his men freelance the whole bloody affair on their own initiative?